All right, let's dive right in. Today we're talking about the 30-second reset. It's a super simple way to get past that mental block that stops you from doing things and, actually use these little tricks to get stuff done.
So let's just start with a question I think we've all asked ourselves at some point. Why is good advice so ridiculously hard to follow, right? We know we should go for a run or finish that big project, but there's this huge gap between knowing and doing.
But what if I told you that the problem isn't you? It's not about a lack of willpower. It's not some kind of moral failure. The big idea we're going to unpack here is that this isn't a willpower problem, it's a design problem.
To fix a design problem, you first have to know what you're up against. And the real enemy here isn't laziness. The real enemy has a name. It's called cognitive load. Think of cognitive load as your brain's available RAM. It's the total amount of mental horsepower you have at any given moment to process information. And the key thing to remember is it's a finite resource. When a task asks for too much, your brain just, it shuts down.
And that overload leads to something called cognitive friction. This is that feeling of resistance you get when a task is just clunky, confusing, or too complicated. It works against how you naturally think. And that friction is what science tells us creates that feeling of being overwhelmed, which is basically procrastination's best friend.
So here's the big switch we need to make in our heads. We've been telling ourselves this story, this myth, that the problem is a lack of willpower. But the reality? The reality is we're just dealing with high cognitive friction. So the solution isn't to try harder, it's to design smarter. Let's get into how to do that.
Okay, tactic number 1. This is all about changing the task itself, not forcing yourself to do it. We are going to absolutely decimate cognitive friction.
This whole idea comes from behavioral science and a guy named B.J. Fogg. His model basically says that for you to do anything, you need motivation, ability, and a prompt. And of those three, the one that's easiest to change, the one with the biggest impact, is always ability. In other words, just make the dang thing easier to do.
So, what's the number one way to make something easier? It's a strategy called chunking. It's super simple. You just take a big, scary, overwhelming task and you break it into tiny, manageable pieces. This just crushes the mental effort you need to even get started.
For example, we're actually doing it right now by chunking this entire explain
Into these little bite-sized slides. See? Each one takes a complex idea and makes it super easy to follow. You can use this exact same approach for literally any task you've been putting off.
All right, on to tactic number 2. So you've made the task simple. That's great, but you still need something to actually kick you into gear. This is where we learn to automate our actions with a little something called a nudge. But first, we have to talk about the intention-action gap. This is a real thing studied by psychologists. It's that frustrating space where our good intentions go to die. We want to do it, we plan to do it, but it just doesn't happen. Sound familiar? Yeah, me too.
So the fix for that gap is a nudge. A nudge is just a tiny change in your environment that points you toward the right action. It's a prompt. It doesn't force you to do anything. It just makes the starting line really, really hard to miss. It's the prompt part of that Fogg model we talked about.
And look, this isn't just some cute idea. It's backed by a ton of science. Big studies have shown that these nudges have a real, measurable effect on our behavior. In short, they actually work.
So what does a nudge look like in real life? It's almost laughably simple. You could set a special alarm sound on your phone that's only for that one task. Or put a sticky note right on your computer screen. Or leave your running shoes right by the door so you trip over them. The whole point is to create an automatic trigger you can't ignore.
Okay, but what about that moment when the alarm goes off, you know the task is easy, but you're just hit with this wave of stress? That feeling of, I just can't. That's where our third and final tactic comes in. You stabilize with a quick refocus.
Refocusing is a super low-effort way to manage stress. And the reason it works so well is that it catches the stress response super early. It takes way less brain power to interrupt that feeling right at the start than it does to try and argue yourself out of it once you're already overwhelmed.
And we're talking about things you can do in literally 3 seconds. Just stop and listen for the quietest sound in the room. Or put all of your attention on the feeling of your feet on the ground. Or just pick one object near you and really notice it. These tiny little actions are like a circuit breaker for that overwhelmed feeling.
Okay, so let's put all 3 of these tactics together. Let's build your complete, ready-to-use toolkit. This is your 30-second reset.
So next time you feel stuck, here's what you do. 1. Lower the friction. Ask yourself, what's the absolute tiniest first step? 2. Add a prompt. Create a simple trigger for that tiny step. And 3. Refocus. Take one deep breath and just notice one thing around you. That's the whole thing.
And that really brings us back to the core idea of all of this. It's a total shift in thinking. The goal is never to add more effort or to muscle through with willpower. The goal is to be clever and strategically remove the effort.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. What could you actually get done? What could you achieve if you stopped trying to try harder and instead you started trying to design smarter?